Hi guys, welcome back. So, in today's video, we are going to be learning about features of the Constitution, and this is the third video in the series of UPSC Polity revision. In this series, we are trying to go topic by topic for the syllabus of UPSC Polity, and we'll try to revise it for prelims and mains both. So, let's jump in. Now let's talk about the functions of a constitution. This is a quite important topic because this is a complete chapter in your class 11th NCRT. Let's look at the functions one by one. First function that the constitution fulfills is that it defines the nature of the government. The nature of the government could be your monarchy or your republic, democratic, right? All those things could be the nature of the government. um, then it also defines boundaries on the power of political community, so that the political community is not misusing the power and there are certain limitations on their power. It defines those as well. And then it expresses the identity and values of the nation. So, for example, in our constitution, it is said that we are a socialist nation. So, it could be other examples as well. So, this is how our constitution defines the identity and values. Then it also defines the rights of the citizen. So, take the example of our constitution. In the third part of the constitution, it defines the fundamental rights. Then it establishes the political institutions and it regulates the political institutions. What this means is that it provides for different political institutions to be created, like, for example, upper house, lower house, right? And what would be their functions? How do those functions get regulated? Everything is defined. Then it also defines the official religion, if any, and it defines the relation of the nation with the official religion or not with any official religion, right? So, for example, any country could be either an atheistic state or a theocratic state or a secular state. And we'll talk more about what these mean when we learn about the preamble. But our country is a secular state. We'll learn what secular means and how Indian secularism is different from Western secularism. All of those topics would come up. Then the it also divides the share of power among different institutions. Um, so basically, it comes under regulation of political institution itself. It defines the limitations on them, sets boundaries on them. It also commits the nation to a common goal. It could be your socialist, economic, or political goal. So, before diving into the actual features of the Constitution, let's learn about a few keywords. And this is important because this has been asked a few times in some prelims questions, and you could sometimes quote them in your mains answers as well. So, what is Constitution? Constitution is a legal document that is the fundamental law of the country, and we've already seen what are the functions of the Constitution. So it's the fundamental law, and it has a special sanctity to itself, right? But constitutionalism is basically limitations on the general state of powers. Um, so it prevents the exercise of arbitrary power, and we discussed in the functions also that the job of a good constitution is to set boundaries on the powers of the political institutions. Um, that is what constitutionalism is, to set limits, to set boundaries so that we can prevent the arbitrary use of power, right? And then constitutional morality, it is the adherence to values and principles enshrined in a constitution. Um, it's yeah, so like it's a consequence. It's a consequence of following the constitution. You have constitution morality. Then the concept of rule of law. So, A.V. Dicey gave this concept of rule of law, and it has majorly three principles to it. One is that absence of arbitrary power, which is constitutionalism, just we just read, right? That is one of the principles. Then equality before law, which means that everyone is equal and equality of opportunity is given to everyone. Then individual liberties, right? So individual rights, individual liberties, that also comes under rule of law, right? Then another concept is constitutional government. Constitutional government, according to Casey Ware, and you can quote this in your mains answers if it is needed, is that a government that is limited by the terms of the constitution. So that is a constitutional government. So all these concepts are really important. There is slight difference in each of them, but that could be a trick questions in your prelims, right? Uh, so let's read this out. Constitutional government is a government which is elected by public through an election process. Head of the state has limited powers, of course, and then specific tenure of the ruler. All of these rules are met in our constitution as well, and some of the example countries are USA, UK, India, Pakistan, etc. A government that is limited by the terms of the constitution is a constitutional government. So let's have a quick revision. Constitution. What is constitution? It is a legal document that is the fundamental law. Constitutionalism is something that provides limitations on the powers and prevents the use of arbitrary power, right? Constitutional morality. It is the values, principles that a constitutional constitution provides, right? Principles. And then concept of rule of law. Arbitrary powers won't be there. There would be equality, absence of arbitrary powers, equality, individual liberties. And a constitutional government is a government limited by the terms of the constitution. Let's look at the different types of constitutions. So, one is evolved versus enacted. Um, in an evolved constitution, there is not a one point of time when the entire constitution is adopted and implemented. It's rather a series of things. It's a series of conventions, practices, events that happen, judicial decisions, right? Those act as the constitution of the country and become the law. And an example is Britain, whereas in an enacted constitution it's all adopted at once, and an example would be US and India. In a written versus in unwritten constitution, you could go along the same lines as evolved versus enacted. In an unwritten constitution, it is series of things over the history of the country that act as the constitution of the country. It could be a book or a document, a judicial decision, um, a series of documents. All of those act as the constitution. An example again being Britain, which is an unwritten constitution. Then there is a written constitution which is adopted at once, which is India and US. And it is all written at one place. Then we have federal versus unitary constitution. Um, so in a federal constitution, it's like a federation of different states where all these different states have their own autonomy. And the examples being US, Russia, Australia. Then in a unitary state, it's the center that is all powerful, and it's not a collection of different states with autonomy. It's only the center that makes decision, and there's a central government. Then there is rigid versus flexible. So we'll talk more about it in coming slides. Rigid is basically, it's very difficult to amend such a constitution. It's like almost written in stone. And in a flexible constitution, it's very easy to amend it. with certain steps that are different for each constitution. Then procedural versus perspective. In a procedural constitution, is like a set of legal and political structure is given to the constitution to the government, and it sets limits to the power of the government. Um, but perspective is like one step ahead of procedural, where it is definitely procedural, but it also sets a societal goal, a nationwide goal that the country is supposed to work towards. Now let's glance at the different features of the Indian Constitution. We will talk about each of these in a very detailed manner in the coming slides. One is length. It's the lengthiest written constitution. It has 25 parts, 12 schedules, and more than 400 articles. It is inspired from various sources. As we've seen in the previous lecture, that it was 60 countries' constitution was looked at before coming up with the draft of our constitution. So the constitution makers went through constitutions of 60 countries. It is a mix of rigidity and flexibility. It is a parliamentary form of government, synthesis of parliamentary sovereignty versus and judicial supremacy. It's integrated and independent judiciary. Fundamental rights are given, directive principles of state policy are given, fundamental duties are given. It's a secular state. Universal adult franchise is there. Single citizenship, independent bodies, emergency provisions, and three-tier of government. So these are some of the unique and some mixed features of our constitution, which are sometimes borrowed from different country constitutions, but they are made our own and adapted to work for the population of the country. And yes, I guess this one is based federal system with a unitary bias. We'll talk more about these in the coming slides. Let's look at the first feature. It is the lengthiest written constitution. Um, Why so? Because in 1950, on 26 November 1950, when it was completely adopted, it had 395 articles, 22 parts, and 8 schedules. And now, in 2025, we have 470 articles, 25 parts, and 12 schedules. So, and there are certain reasons for having a bulky constitution. Those are basically because it was extended from the Government of India Act 1935, which in itself was a bulky um, uh, written document. It had a lot of provisions, and a lot of the provisions in the constitution are adopted from the Government of India Act 1935. Then the country is vast, and as we've seen in the previous lectures, it was after the draft was prepared, the country was given 8 months to dwell on it and give suggestions to the uh, Constituent Assembly, and those suggestions were also incorporated, and the draft was modified according to public opinion. So, vastness of the country and its diversity definitely plays a big role in why the constitution is lengthy. Then, single constitution for center and state. We do not have separate constitution for center and state, unlike the US, where all of the states have their own constitution, plus there is a central constitution. That is not the case in India. Then majority of the lawyers and politicians were part of the Constituent Assembly, which makes the language used in the Constitution very lawyer and politician friendly. It's a little complicated language that is used, and all of the um, conditions are written in there, right? So, incorporated public opinion, already talked about this in the vastness of the country, right? And inspired by over 60 countries, amended 106 times since its commencement. So, as we can see, right, the difference, we had 395 articles in the beginning, and now we have 470. all those amendments that took place, and 22 to 25 parts now, 8 schedules to 12 schedules now. An important feature of our constitution is that it is drawn from various sources. So, uh, to give a brief overview, the structural part of the constitution is directly derived from the Government of India Act 1935. It gives the structure to our constitution. The philosophical part is derived from USA, Ireland, and the Soviet Union. Uh, why calling this philosophical is because, like, it talks about the societal aspect, and general societal goals of the country. So we have the fundamental rights for the society, we have the directive principles of state policy, which are sort of giving the moral to our constitution, and we have fundamental duties, which is the responsibility of the society towards the country. So, fundamental rights are borrowed from USA, TPSP borrowed from Ireland, and fundamental duties from the Soviet Union. And this was not originally in the constitution, it was amended later on. We'll talk more about this when we get there. The political part of our constitution is derived from the UK Parliament. Um, uh, Basically, the features like cabinet government, relation between executive and legislature. These are the parts that are derived from the UK Parliament. So, structural part, Government of India Act; philosophical part, which is fundamental rights, DPSP, and fundamental duties, USA, Ireland, Soviet Union; and political part, UK Parliament. Coming to all of the different sources of the Constitution, as we've seen before, there were total 60 constitutions that were looked at and taken inspiration from for our constitution. But these are some of the major ones. These are given in your Lakshmikant book. This is a direct page from there. And we will give a little time and we'll talk about each of these, because this is an important question that could come. It could be even a mains question as well. So, coming to the Government of India Act, this act gives the bulk to our constitution. It gives us the federal scheme, Office of Governor, Judiciary, Public Service Commission, emergency provisions, and administrative details. And also, make sure it's not that, like, if emergency provision is coming from Government of India Act, it's not also inspired from some other place, because for this particular example, if you see, emergency provision is also derived from the um, German constitution. Constitution of Germany also gives the emergency provisions relating to suspension of fundamental rights. So, as they were inspired from different constitutions, they took the good parts of all of it. So, provisions were given in the Government of India Act 1935, and the suspension of fundamental rights part of it was taken from the Weimar Constitution of Germany. Now, the British Constitution gives us the parliamentary form of government. It gives us rule of law, which is your Article 14 of the Constitution. It gives us legislative procedure, single citizenship, cabinet system, writs, parliamentary privileges, and bicameralism. So, a good way to remember this is a very nice mnemonic we can use is Parley Biscuit. PA stands for parliamentary form of government, R stands for rule of law, LE stands for legislative procedures, and BI stands for bicameralism, SC is single citizenship, and what is left now is writs. Writs you would have to remember separately. Writs, and then first past the post system, and Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So these are the things that are borrowed from the Constitution of Britain. Um, just a quick thing about the first past the post system. It is simply your basic majority system where it is not required that a person gets more than 50% of the votes. It is just whoever gets the highest votes wins the election. That is the gist of first past the post system, right? Coming to the US Constitution, the US Constitution gives us fundamental rights, independence of the judiciary, judicial review, impeachment of the president and vice president, removal of Supreme Court and High Court judges, and post of vice president, right? We already said vice president. So how you can remember is with this mnemonic device, which is president needs fund for removal of current vice president and judges in USA. So USA, just to remember that this is all borrowed from the US Constitution. President is impeachment of president. Needs fund is fundamental rights. Removal is impeachment of whom? Of vice president and also the judges, removal of Supreme Court and High Court judges, and the post of vice president. Yeah, so that is what's borrowed from the US Constitution. The Irish Constitution gives us a very important thing, which is the directive principles of the state policy. Already talked about them in the philosophical part, right? Um, and the nomination of members of Rajya Sabha and the method of election of the president. So how you can remember this is Ellie's DP number one. Um, is the election method of the president. DP is DPSP. Number one is stands for nomination of the members of Rajya Sabha. So LSDP number one is Irish Constitution. In the Canadian Constitution, we've borrowed federation with a strong center, vesting of residuary powers in the center, appointment of state governors by the center, and advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So, how you can remember this is can I know Fed's address? So, can means Canada, Feds means Federation with a strong center, and AD stands for um, advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and RES stands for residuary powers in the center. That's Canada's contribution to our constitution. Coming to Australia, Australia gives us concurrent list, freedom of trade, commerce and intercourse, and joint sitting of the two houses of the parliament. These are the things Australia gives us. Then Weimar Constitution of Germany, we already talked about the suspension of fundamental rights during an emergency. That is what Weimar Constitution of Germany gives us. Soviet Constitution, USSR, which is now Russia. This gives us fundamental duties and the ideal of justice. It's as you've seen in our preamble, or if you've not, we'll talk about it in the coming lecture. Our preamble says justice, social, economic, and political. That is coming from the USSR Constitution. The French Constitution gives us republic and ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity. Again, this is in the preamble. Liberty, equality, fraternity. That comes from French Constitution. We have the South African Constitution that gives us procedure of amendment of the Constitution and election of members of the Rajya Sabha. So again, we've seen this nomination of members of Rajya Sabha, Irish Constitution, LSDP number one, right? Nomination and election. is given by South African Constitution, how the members of Rajya Sabha are elected, right? And the election of the Rajya Sabha members is given by the South African Constitution, and the election of the president is given by the Irish Constitution. So, Irish Constitution gives us election of president, nomination of Rajya Sabha member, and South African Constitution gives us the election of Rajya Sabha members. Procedure of amendment of the Constitution is also borrowed from the South African Constitution. Japanese Constitution, it gives us procedure established by law. So there are two kinds of things. One is procedure established by law, and there is due process of law. We'll talk more about this in the coming lectures, but just to give you a brief, procedure established by law is something that is written in the law text and has to be followed and taken direction from. Then there is a due process of law, which means um, a, a procedure to uh, finally establish that and give the correct justice. So, this is something followed in the US Constitution, the due process of law in the US judicial system. It follows the due process of law and not the procedure established by law. Another feature is that our constitution is a blend of rigidity and flexibility. Uh, by rigidity, it means that some of the articles are not that easy to amend. Similar to the American Constitution, the American Constitution is completely rigid. It is very difficult to amend it. So some features are amended by a special majority, which is two-thirds of the majority of each house present and voting should be there, and then a majority of the total membership of each house, right? That's what your special majority is. And then some amendments by special majority plus ratification by 50 states. So some amendments are done by just the special majority, some also need ratification by 50% of the states. That means half of the states should ratify the amendment that is done. Only then the amendment would be passed, right? Um, it is also flexible in certain cases because some of the articles are very easily amendable by a simple majority. And to tell you, the Article 368 covers the special majority and how to amend using that majority, but that simple majority is not covered by that. Simple majority is covered by Article 100. So that means more than 50% of the members present and voting in each of the house separately, and that is enough to pass the motion. Then the example of a flexible constitution is the British Constitution, which is also easy to amend. So one feature is that it is a federal system, but it has certain unitary biases. So it's not completely federal, it is not completely unitary. Some examples would be for the federal system is that the US is a completely federal system. In the unitary system, you have Japan, which is a unitary form of government. So, we'll just read about a few of the features of our constitutions that correspond to the federal system. Those are so basically two governments. We have the central government and we have the state government. So that means it is federal. That means there's a division of power, right? And okay, next point itself is division of power. Then we have a written constitution, which also means it's a federal form of government. Um, then we have constitutional supremacy, and we have a rigidity of the constitution. That is a federal feature, rigidity. Um, Independence of the judiciary is a federal feature. Bicameralism is also a federal feature. Um, but the word federation is never used in our constitution. Why is that? Because India still wanted to be something that is united. We wanted unity in diversity is our slogan, right? So we wanted a united front. That is why the word federation directly is never used. Now let's look at the unitary features of our constitution. So we have a strong center, as we can see. So we have the residuary powers to the center, right? So that also means it's a strong center. Then we have a single constitution. We do not have multiple constitutions like the USA. We have flexibility of the constitution, that is a unitary feature. So rigidity is a federal feature, but flexibility is a unitary feature. And why that is because when you are able to change something, when you are able to change the constitution, that favors the center more, right? Um, then we have appointment of the governor, which is a unitary feature because the governor is the center's representative in state. We have Union Public Service Commission, which is the all India services, and those are again a unitary feature. Emergency provision, where the fundamental rights are seized and the power goes to the governor. That is a unitary feature. Then Article 1 of the Constitution says India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. It's a very important thing, and you can also quote it in a mains answer when something like this comes up, that India is a union of states. It is completely exactly given in the constitution, and what it means is that not a result of agreement of states. Basically, unlike the US constitution, where all these different states agreed to come together and form one country, that is not the case in India. And it also means that the states do not have the right to secede from India. That means they cannot form their own country. They have to be a part of India. And you can also quote that India is also called um, an indestructible union of destructible states. We'll talk more about that. But basically, the states are not permanent, but the union is permanent. That's what it means. And we can also write that Casey Ware said that India's federalism is quasi federalism. That means not completely true federalism. And it is also called cooperative federalism, which it was said by Granville Austin. And it means that it depends on the cooperation of different states. We also have the parliamentary form of government, and it is also called the Westminster model of government. It was borrowed from the British Parliament, and it basically depends upon the coordination between the legislative and the executive organs, which means that there is no complete separation of power between the legislative and the executive. And how that is implemented for us here is that we have a nominal and a real executive. So, nominal executive is our president. So, our president is the nominal head. And then we have the real executive, which is the prime minister and the council. So, and we have majority party rule. Um, and yeah, so majority party rule is another feature of the parliamentary form of government. We have the responsibility of executives to legislature. The executives have a responsibility to legislature. They have answerability to legislature. That means there's a coordination between executive and legislature. Then dissolution of lower house. The lower house gets dissolved. Um, and the membership of ministers in legislature, the membership of executives in legislature. Basically, your prime minister is also part of the legislative organ, right? So your executives are also part of the legislative organs. So that is another feature of the parliamentary form of government, and then leadership of the prime minister. That is a feature of parliamentary form of government. So we also have parliamentary sovereignty. Along with that, we have judicial supremacy. So there is a system of checks and balances, we call it. Um, so Parliament is sovereign, and it works to create and amend laws. It is free to create and amend laws. And also judiciary is independent in itself. It has the supremacy, and it can declare any law as unconstitutional. So as you can see here, declare laws as unconstitutional, and parliamentary sovereignty, parliament can create and amend laws. So they both work in sync, and they put checks on each other's rulings. So that is a system that we've adopted. The judiciary supremacy is taken from the American Constitution, and the parliamentary sovereignty is taken from the British Constitution. So, in line of the different contrasting features that our constitution has, another one is integrated and independent judiciary. So, our judiciary system is independent, and while being independent, it is still integrated with an entire system in the country. So, what we are saying means that the integrated means if there's a hierarchical system of courts, you have your Supreme Court, and then you have your uh, Supreme Court is also called the Federal Court, and under that you have the high courts of different states, and under that more courts, and that's how it works. We'll talk more about it when we talk about the judiciary, but know that there's a hierarchical system, and these are integrated courts. And also there's a appellate system where you appeal to a higher court to rectify a decision taken by a lower court, right? Supreme Court is also a guarantor of fundamental rights and the guardian of the Constitution, um, right? And the Supreme Court also enforces both state and central laws. That is why it's another kind of way to say it's integrated, right? It enforces all the laws. Definitely, center takes precedence if there's a clash, but that's how it works. Then coming to the independence of the judiciary. So the judiciary has power to punish for contempt of the court, which is very important so that they are completely independent, and nobody can contempt can anybody can be held in contempt of the court and can be punished for that. There's fixed secure tenure for the judges. The judges' expenses are on the Consolidated Fund of India, and judges are banned to practice after their retirement. So there are some of these things that help keep the judiciary independent and allow the judges to be independent of the executive and the legislature. Some of the other features are we have fundamental rights, which is borrowed from the US Constitution. We have fundamental duties, which are borrowed from the Soviet Union. And the fundamental duties did not exist before. We already talked about this. They were added as part of the 42nd Amendment Act. And they were added in the part 4A of the Constitution. We have fundamental rights, which are part third of the Constitution. We'll talk about it separately. We have a different lecture for just the fundamental rights. Yeah. So have DPSP. Uh, so DPSP is Directive Principles of State Policy. These are borrowed from the Irish Constitution, and they are the part 4 of the Constitution. These are non-justiciable, but they are sort of a moral obligation for the Constitution. There are three kinds of DPSP in the Indian Constitution. There is socialistic, Gandhian, and liberal intellectual. We'll talk more about it in a separate lecture. Um, just a quick fact, which you can also quote in your mains, is that in the Minerva Mills case of 1980, the Supreme Court said that Indian Constitution is founded on the bedrock of balance between fundamental rights and DPSP. In the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976, the word secular was added as part of the preamble. But to tell you what the Supreme Court said about this is that even without adding the word secular, the Constitution still had the secular provisions that were already existing. So let's talk about what secularism means. There's Western secularism, there's Indian secularism. Western secularism means there's a complete separation between church and state. There's a complete separation between your religion and your government. So this is a negative form of secularism. In India, the secularism is a more positive connotation. So what it means is that India protects all religions equally. All of the religions have a protection from the government. All of the religions have a protection from by the government. And yeah, so the reason why India is a secular country is that we abolished the communal representation, which was the separate electorate system that was introduced by the British when they were ruling. Then we have universal adult franchise, and this is one of the very important features that as soon as the constitution was adopted, we had a universal adult franchise, which means everybody gets the right to vote after a certain age. For us, it's 18. It used to be 21. Um, then we have the fundamental rights, these articles. You can take a screenshot. We'll talk more about this when we talk about the fundamental rights. We have the fundamental rights chapter. Then we have the Uniform Civil Code, um, which means that the rules apply equally to all of the religions. And we'll talk more about these when we go through these topics separately. So, yeah, we have universal adult franchise. Already talked about this. The age used to be 21, but now after 1989, the age was decreased to 18. Every person above the age of 18 has the right to vote. Uh, So, despite the huge population and extreme poverty, social inequality, and overwhelming illiteracy, we were able to adopt the universal adult franchise, which is a great deal in itself. We have single citizenship, which was borrowed from the British Constitution. So, in the US Constitution, there is multiple citizenships. Every citizen of the US has a citizenship of the country and also a citizenship of the state. And also, there are separate constitutions for the center and the state, which is not the case for us. In India, we only have the Indian citizenship. So we have certain constitutional as well as extra constitutional bodies, and we are ensuring there's ensured independence of these bodies. Some of the examples would be Election Commission, Comptroller and Auditor General, Union Public Service Commission, State Public Service Commission, and uh, and all of these organizations are ensured uh, independence in certain ways. So basically, their expenses are on the Consolidated Fund of India, their tenure is secured. We'll talk more about these features and their independence when we do separate lectures on these bodies. So we have the emergency provisions. These were borrowed from the British Constitution. Um, and the suspension of fundamental rights during an emergency, that was borrowed from the German Constitution, which is Article 21 and 22. They talk about suspension of no, sorry. So all the fundamental rights are suspended except the ones guaranteed by Article 21, which is right to life and personal liberty, and Article 22, which talks about the imprisonment and rights related to that. We'll talk about it in the fundamental rights chapter. Then the let's look at the articles associated with the emergency. We have 352, 356, and 360. So you remember 352 and just keep adding 4 to it, and you get 356 and 360. So Article 352 talks about the national emergency. Article 356 talks about the president's rule, which is also called the state emergency. And Article 360 is financial emergency. Yeah, so that is it. Another thing is that whenever an emergency is declared, it must be approved by both houses of the parliament within a given duration. It's around 6 months. We'll talk more about it. But and it after every that that amount of duration, we have to get a reapproval from both houses of the parliament. That is a catch in case of emergencies. So to implement the vision of Mahatma Gandhi, the 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts were done in 1992, and these acts allowed for the local self government bodies, those being panchayats for villages and municipalities for cities. So, in the 73rd Amendment Act, panchayats were introduced, Section 11, Part 9 of the Constitution. And in the 74th Amendment Act, Schedule 11, Part 9. In 74th Amendment Act, Schedule 12, Part 9A of the Constitution was added, and it talked about municipalities. So there are three kinds of municipalities. There's Nagar Panchayat, um, which is like a transition area of village and cities, more like towns. Then for the small cities, we have municipal council, and for larger cities or metro cities, we have municipal corporations. So, our constitution also provides for the right to form cooperative societies, which is added to Article 19. And there was another DPSP added, which was corresponding to promotion of the cooperative societies. And a new part of the constitution was also added, which was the Part 9B, and it talks about the cooperative societies, certain rules regarding the cooperative societies that are to be followed. So now let's look at the different criticisms of the constitution. And as seen earlier in the lecture on constituent assembly, there were certain criticisms of the constituent assembly itself. So these could also be related to that, and these follow directly from there. So one criticism was that the entire constitution is borrowed. It is not original. It is taken from different sources. It is copied. So as a response to that, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said that a constitution that is formed so late in history cannot be expected to have new things. The only thing that can be expected is that we avoid the mistakes done by the constitutions before us, and we take all of the good parts from the different constitutions. It was also said that it is a carbon copy of the Government of India Act 1935. So, P.R. Deshmukh, who was a part of the Constituent Assembly, said that it is essentially the Government of India Act, just adding the adult franchise to it. In response to that, Dr. Ambedkar said that there is no shame in borrowing. No one holds copyrights to the ideas of a constitution, and it does not come under plagiarism. So, there is no shame in borrowing the good parts of an existing constitution, or for this case, the Act of 1935. Another thing that followed from the carbon copy comment is that um, K. Hanumanthaya, another member of the Constituent Assembly, said that we wanted the music of sitar here, but here we have the music of an English band, which means that since it is borrowed from the English sources, the English Constitution as well as the Government of India Act 1935, it is not original, it is not Indian, it is anti-Indian. And Loknath Mishra also said it's a slavish imitation of the West. Then another criticism was that it's un-Gandhian. It does not follow the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi, who was a great leader of our country. And the reason for this was said to be the Ambedkar Gandhi antagonism. K. Hanumanthaya, again, member of the Constituent Assembly, said that this is exactly the kind of constitution Mahatma Gandhi did not envisage. Panchayats were not a part of the constitution which was originally drafted. That was added, as we've seen earlier, in the 73rd Amendment Act. So that is why it was said that it is not Gandhian. Elephantine size, we've talked about this. Our constitution is a huge document. It is bulky, and there are different reasons for it. To which H.V. Kamath, member of the Constituent Assembly, said that it is the bulkiest constitution ever produced and it is elephantine. It was also said that the emblem of the constitution, which is an elephant, makes complete sense because the constitution is elephantine. It is also said that it is a paradise of the lawyers. Sir Ivory Jennings said that it's a lawyer's paradise. It opens up vast avenues for litigation. Because the members of the Constituent Assembly were mostly politicians and lawyers, this is this was unavoidable. Now let's talk about the different parts of the Constitution with the help of a mnemonic device. So what you can remember is you can fly directly from US to UP to meet child of Shyam and Ram. Fruits taste sweet to eat, so only eat Maggie as a tasty snack, right? So, and using this, the first letters of each of these would correspond to the name of the particular part of the constitution. So here it is. U stands for Union and its territories. C, citizenship. F, fundamental rights, directly directive principles of state policy. From F, fundamental duties. U, union government. S, state government. U, union territories. P, panchayat. M, municipalities. C, cooperative society. So you could also remember like child of cooperative societies. Then Shyam is scheduled and tribal areas. So if you can even like think of it like there's a sh sound, right? And there's a sh sound here as well. So scheduled and tribal areas. Then Ram is relations between union and state. Fruits is finance, property, contracts and suits. Taste, trade, commerce and intercourse with the territory of India. Sweet, service under the union and state. Two, tribunals, eat elections. So, special provisions related to certain classes. Only official language. E, emergency provision. M, miscellaneous as amendments of the Constitution. Tasty tea, temporary, transitional, and special provisions, and snack S, which is the last one. And we've talked about this earlier also. It's the short title, Commencement of the Constitution, authoritative text in Hindi. So, this is how you can remember this. Take some time, go through this, and if you revise it a few times, I think it would be easy to remember this. And there have been a few questions around this in the prelims as well. So It's really important that you remember these. Also added screenshots of the same from Lakshmi Kant. If you can uh, look at these as well, you could find out the article numbers also. You don't have to dive very deep into the article numbers and try to mug up everything, because as we learn more about these chapters separately, we would tend to remember the article numbers. Now, coming to the questions, um, after reading this chapter, you should be able to answer the questions that are given here. Please comment with your answers. The first question is: which one of the following in Indian polity is an essential feature that indicates that it is a federal in character? So, your options are: the independence of the judiciary, the union legislative has elected representatives from constituent units, the union cabinet can have elected representatives from regional parties, the fundamental rights are enforced by the court of law. So, which of these features is a federal feature? The other question is: which of the following statements are correct about the Constitution of India? And this was asked in 2024 prelims quite recently. So, the options are: powers of the municipalities are given in the part 9A of the Constitution. We've already talked about it in the previous slides. Emergency provisions are given in the part 18 of the Constitution. Provisions related to the amendment of Constitution are given in part 20 of the Constitution. So you need to say which of these statements are correct and comment with your answers. Thank you for taking this lecture, and let's see you in the next one.